Sai Go Premanandi. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Shila Abhay Charna Ravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Shila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Shila Prabhupada Ki Anant Kori Vaishnav Vrind Ki Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur Ki प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड की गोवर्धन की मथुरा धाम की वृंदावन धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की मायापुर धाम की गंगा माई की यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी की श्रीला प्रभुपाद ट्रांसलेशनल बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की Srila Prabhupada Translation Prasharam Distribution Ki Nitai Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga. Krishna Prasthaya Bhutani Prabhupada Vigiraja Swami Sokta Sastra Vigiraja Sadha Shavadra Bhagwan Krishna Vedanta Swami Dhanam Sudham Gurvan Chana Vishesha Nivadi Prasthaya Dayati Chita Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. We're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 24, verse number 10. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, Chapter 24, text number 10, chapter title Renunciation of Kardama Muni. Bhagavantam Param Brahma Satvenam Shena Shatruhan Tattva Sankhyan Vigyapitai Jatam Vidwan Ajaswarat Bhagavantam Param Brahma Satvenam Shena Shatruhan Tattva Sankhyan Vigyapitai Jatam Vidvan Ajaswarat Bhagavantam Param Brahma Satvenam Shena Shatruhan Tattva Sankhyan Vigyapatyai Jatam Vidvan Ajaswarat Word for word translation. Bhagavantam, the Lord. Param, supreme. Brahma, Brahman. Satvena, having an uncontaminated existence. Amshena, by a plenary portion. Shatruha, O killer of the enemy. Vidura, O killer of the enemy Vidura. Tattva Sankhya, the philosophy of the 24 material elements. Vigyapatyai, for explaining. Jatam, appeared. Vidwan, knowing. Ajaha, the unborn, Lord Brahma. Swarat, independent. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Abhay Charnarvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Translation. Maitreya continued, O killer of the enemy, the unborn Lord Brahma, who is almost independent in acquiring knowledge, could understand that a portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his quality of pure existence had appeared in the womb of Devahuti, just to explain the complete state of knowledge known as Sankhya Yoga. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, it is stated that the Lord Himself is the compiler of Vedanta Sutra, and He is the perfect knower of Vedanta Sutra. Similarly, the Sankhya philosophy is compiled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in His appearance as Kapila. There is an imitation Kapila who has a Sankhya philosophical system, but Kapila, the incarnation of God, is different from that Kapila. Kapila, the son of Kardama Muni, in his system of Sankhya philosophy, very explicitly explained not only the material world, but also the spiritual world. Brahma could understand this fact because he is Swarat, almost independent in receiving knowledge. He is called Swarat because he did not go to any school or college to learn, but learned everything from within. Because Brahma is the first living creature within this universe, he had no teacher. His teacher was the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself, who is seated in the heart of every living creature. Brahma acquired knowledge directly from the Supreme Lord within the heart. Therefore, he is sometimes called Swarat and Aja. Another important point is stated here. Satvenam Shena. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears, He brings with Him all His paraphernalia of Vaikuntha. Therefore, His name, His form, His quality, His paraphernalia, and His entourage all belong to the transcendental world. Real goodness is in the transcendental world. Here in the material world, the quality of goodness is not pure. Goodness may exist, but there must also be some tinges of passion and ignorance. In the spiritual world, the unalloyed quality of goodness prevails. There, the quality of goodness is called Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness. Another name for Shuddha Sattva is Vasudeva, because God is born from Vasudeva. Another meaning is that when one is purely situated in the qualities of goodness, he can understand the form, name, quality, paraphernalia, and entourage of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word Amshena also indicates that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, appeared as Kapila Dev in a portion of his portion. God expands either as Kala or as Amsha. Amsha means direct expansion and Kala means expansion of the expansion. There is no difference between the expansion of the expansion, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly, as there is no difference between one candle and another. But still, the candle from which the others are lit is called the original. Krishna, therefore, is called the Par Brahman, or the ultimate Godhead, and cause of all causes. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. Thank you everyone again for this morning. So we are reading from Canto 3, chapter 24, verse number 10. I'll read the translation again. Maitreya continued, O killer of the enemy, the unborn Lord Brahma, who is almost independent in acquiring knowledge, could understand that a portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his quality of pure existence, had appeared in the womb of Devahuti just to explain the complete state of knowledge known as Sankhya Yoga. So, this chapter is titled Renunciation of Kardama Muni, and the previous chapter was Devahuti's lamentation. So far what's happened in this chapter, this is verse number 10, is that Devahuti towards the end of the previous chapter was lamenting as Kardama Muni was getting ready to leave, and she was lamenting that she had all this time, but she really couldn't really take advantage of the transcendental knowledge that he could have imparted to her. So at the start of this chapter, Kardama Muni pacifies Devahuti by telling her, you've, by your austerities and penances, the Supreme Lord will soon appear in your womb, and as a result of that, and what will come forth from that is there'll be the Supreme Personality of God himself will appear, and he will teach this knowledge of Sankhya Yoga, and as a result of that, you will attain perfection. So that's just happened, and the demigods in the previous verses were actually showering praises, and there was a moment of great pomp and celebration. And following that, Lord Brahma has now come to the scene, and what he'll be doing would be glorifying this until the 20th verse will actually be where Lord Brahma is actually glorifying Devahuti and Kardama Muni for their austerities, penances, and most importantly, their devotion to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, a lot of instructive points in this purport, verse and purport. And actually towards the end, if you see Srila Prabhupada making the point, the ultimate Godhead and cause of all causes. So obviously, everything we see in the Bhagavatam is actually categorized in these three facets of knowledge: Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So Sambandha, Krishna is the ultimate cause of all causes. Obviously, we as devotees, practicing sadhakas, trying to understand that principle, Krishna as being the cause of all causes. And a lot of times we just, we may, when we're saying it, it may just sound very casual and, not monotonous, but, oh, Krishna is the cause of all causes. And, how much are we truly understanding that? How much are we living that with that realization? So in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse number 8, the very first verse is Aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. I am the source of all material and spiritual worlds. Everything emanates from me. To those who know it, I can't remember the last bit of it. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So what does it mean to know Krishna? Right? A lot of times when we distribute books, especially those of you that do this day in, day out, when you approach someone, and it's quite common for someone, that you may approach who's from an Indian upbringing, they'll say, oh, we know all about Krishna. We've grown up with Krishna. My grandmother would sing pastimes of Krishna to put me to bed. So I know all about Krishna. Some may fall in the other category where you see scholars who've actually done a lot of extensive research on Krishna's, on Krishna's epistemology, archaeology, and many other factors. But how much do they actually, what are they doing with that knowledge? As Krishna explains here, the wise who know this, engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So ultimately, everything culminates in devotional service. So bhakti is not only limited, or it doesn't just stop with the conviction of a head, but it actually culminates in an affair of the heart. So bhakti is an affair of the heart. Once I was hearing Vijay Prabhu, Vijay Prabhu, the book distributor, he was distributing book to someone somewhere in America, and that person, when he was taking the book, he's like, no, I'm just not feeling it. And Vijay Prabhu tells him, over here you're not feeling it, but over here you need it. And the person was so convinced, like, oh, I need to buy this book. So ultimately, bhakti is an affair of the heart. And Krishna is the embodiment of everything we actually long for. So in that verse 10.8 that I just said, what it boils down to is each of us have a longing in this life to love and be loved. And Krishna is the embodiment of everything we aspire for. Because for us, all of our relationships, everything that we pursue in this life or in this world, it's all centered around that exchange of love. Tamal Krishna Maharaj once said, love is not the sentiment, love is in the detail. So a lot of it, we'll be speaking about it later on, of how that love actually, there are layers to it. So when we read about personalities like Kardama Muni, Prahlad Maharaj, Ambarish Maharaj, the wives of the Brahmanas, at least for myself, I feel there can be times when I just feel discouraged, like, oh, look at them and look at me. There's at times, at least for myself, there's a reality. I feel like a sense of reality check, and say, oh, there they are, and there I am, and there's such a huge gap. In fact, I wouldn't even say there's a gap. It's just, life. You're just lifetimes away from even thinking of what it's like to be performing devotional service with that sort of intensity. So recently I was listening to a class by His Holiness Swayam Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj, where he spoke on a sutra which helped me understand, or at least over the last week, that I've been taking and just writing it to myself to understand how much more is there for me, and at least understanding we should actually take an inventory of where we are at the end of the day. So if today I should have an honest conversation with myself. Today, this is what I did as an offering to Radha Gopinath and to the Vaishnavas. Where did I fare in all of these respects? So, Maharaj was saying, what does it mean to be a devotee, right? What does it mean to be a devotee? I may dress like a devotee. Obviously, we, as that who have taken the ascribe to a lifestyle of devotional service where we've taken initiation, we actually chant a certain number of rounds, we follow the 4 regular principles, we engage in practical devotional service. But are we really cultivating the inner emotions, the inner, as they say, the inner life of a devotee? So Maharaj's topic, you can look it up on YouTube. His class that he had actually given was titled The Inner Life of a Devotee. So he was relaying it from some very interesting pastimes. And he said that once a devotee went up to His Holiness Radhanath Swami, and this devotee had lost his initiation beads. Not a good thing to do. He had lost his initiation beads. He goes up to Maharaj and he says, and I believe it was during a parikrama, or it was during some pilgrimage. And he goes up to Maharaj, Maharaj, I lost my beads. But here are new beads, can you chant on them? Maharaj looks at him, and this devotee was a grihasta. Do you ever forget your wife? The devotee was just dumbfounded, like, oh. He just thought it'll be as simple as Maharaj just chanting again and giving him his beads again. What Swami Bhagavan Maharaj was saying, what we will take with us at the end of the life. Yes, we've chanted our rounds attentively and following the instructions of the spiritual master, but what we should be taking is a genuine taste for the holy name. Are we really cultivating that sense of attachment for the holy name, which will help us get closer to Krishna? As devotees, we also, every day, we have Srimad Bhagavatam class, and Srila Prabhupada has written all of these books for us, just for us to. Srila Prabhupada said, not only you distribute these, Srila Prabhupada said, distributing the books will bring devotees, but reading those books will actually keep those devotees. So, a lot of times, it happens with us that we build on our collection of books. Sometimes I just think if I just sleep right next to my bookshelf, maybe I'll wake up in the morning and I'll be fully enlightened with all the transcendental knowledge. Divya Gyan. It doesn't happen. At the end of our life, are we going to go and tell that we read all these books, or are we going to take genuine realizations of our Krishna consciousness or the experiences that we've had, which have actually not only nourished our bhakti, but most importantly, given us a sense of attachment to Radha Gopinath. In this world, especially in the material world, everything is centered around titles. We all have different professions, different occupations, different designations, upadhis, as it's described in as Rupa Goswami describes them. We all are covered by all these upadhis. And the material world is somehow or the other, the more designations you have, the more titles you have, the more glorious you are. But are we going to take these titles with us, or are we going to take the genuine mood of service with us? Because that's what actually matters in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, in this material world, there's a competition of being the first. I want to be the first. I want to be such and such person to be glorified. And because we're all conditioned, and this material world gives us that opportunity to really be the Lord of the universe. It gives an opportunity, but doesn't, it never actually fructifies into what we actually want it to be. So, are we in the spiritual world? Once my Guru Maharaj was asking this question to Pradyumna Prabhu, that if everything in the material world is a reflection of the spiritual world, that means that pride must also exist in the spiritual world. Because we see pride here, we see everything that we see in the spiritual world, everything we see in the material world is a blunt reflection is a reflection of what exists in the truest form in the spiritual world. So pride must also exist. And Pradyumna Prabhu said, yes, pride exists in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, our pride is on being the last in the queue, as opposed to being the first in the queue in the material world. So in the spiritual world, our pride is in having as many masters as we can. And that actually gives utmost satisfaction because we're really cultivating that mood of Das, Das, Anudas. Recently, I've been reading Bhakti Siddhanta Vaibhava, the biography of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And in that, it is described Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, whenever he would meet any of his disciples or anyone that he would, even government dignitaries, he would always write or exclaim, Dasosmi, I'm your servant. And he actually went to great lengths just to facilitate anyone that was coming into, for example, if anyone was coming from outside of Calcutta or Navadvip just to visit him, he would always go the extra mile just to facilitate that person's visit and just to make them feel more special. You would see a side of him in the classes, but in person, he would actually be this person who was really cultivate, who was really practicing that humility. So, Maharaj, Swayam Bhagwan Maharaj was actually describing the sutra, which helped at least me understand when I was reading about Kardama Muni. And he said these 4 things. In order for personalities who have actually perfected, or we see Kardama Muni, Prahlad Maharaj, and all these other exalted devotees in the pages of the Bhagavatam and the Chaitanya Charitamrita, they live their life based on this sutra. First, they live without pretending. They hear without defending. They speak without offending. And lastly, they love without expecting. So love, to live without pretending. These days we see, at least, when I speak for myself, so Maharaj was describing, by living without pretending, we actually are living a life of honesty. And where there's honesty, there's purity. These days you see people are not authentic. People are pretentious. And because, like I said, this material world is conditioned in such a way that what is it that makes us vulnerable to all of these is because every conditioned living entity has imperfect senses. And because the conditioned entity has imperfect senses, they are always in illusion. And because they're in illusion, they always have a tendency to commit mistakes. And finally, because of all this, there's a tendency to commit to cheating propensity. So interestingly, the first 3 defects, imperfect senses, being in illusion, committing mistakes, that is the default nature of this world. But the very moment that we step into this world, you can say, this is how we will be packaged. But the cheating propensity is solely up to us. Do we give in to that or not? If we all remember in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, what is that? We see the story of the bull and how Dharma is only sitting on one leg. What is that one leg? Truthfulness. And as Kali Yuga is progressing, that leg is also, but that's the only leg that's actually still surviving. So we have to live a life of honesty and integrity. Once there was some person who actually had heard of Srila Prabhupada, and every day, and he said, this Swami Prabhupada, I need to find out what's the deal about this Swami, because everyone is glorifying him. Obviously, when someone speaks, when someone lectures, there's a side of that person, but then behind closed doors, there's another side to that person, and in closer circles, there's also another side of that person. So he said, let me find out about this person. So this person lived with Prabhupada and after a week, this person says, this Swami is a genuine sadhu. I've been with this sadhu throughout the day when he was speaking to everyone, in the innermost chambers when he's with his servants or when he's dictating. I have come to this realization, or I have come to this conclusion, that Srila Prabhupada or this Swami is not here to impress anyone. He was just being genuine, authentic, and being to himself. There was once a story of Jayananda Prabhu. Jayananda Prabhu, that photo that we have, the personality that actually helped, the devotee who helped Srila Prabhupada in actually bringing the Rath Yatra to the West Coast. And this Jayananda Prabhu, he was so humble. He was so, you could say he was decorated with such beautiful Vaishnava qualities that actually when he passed away, when he left, he actually left at a very young age. And when devotees had organized a funeral for this Jayananda Prabhu, it turns out to be that obviously they were just devotees at the funeral, but then they turned out to be a big group of Italian mafia people who actually came to his funeral. And devotees are like, okay, if mafia is here, what's up? So they see the mafia come, and the moment they see the picture of Jayananda Prabhu, they just start weeping. Johnny Ananda, and just started. They were like, Johnny Ananda, yeah, my Johnny Ananda. Like, how do you know him? Like every day he would come, and he would speak so sweetly that we would actually give him all our fruits and vegetables for free. So he would take all of, all the produce, everything that was, all the bhoga that was needed for deity worship, for festivals, he would all get them for free. Just because, and they said, in him we saw a person who had integrity. And that's what endeared him so much to others. Srila Bhaktivinoda Swami Thakur says, weakness is not an obstacle, cheating is an obstacle. And again, where there's honesty, there's purity. A lot of times, sometimes, we may face this dilemma, especially for those that work out in the outside world, there's this, we have to live two lives. A lot of times people say, especially for my parents or, relatives, what's wrong with you? Can't you just be normal? And Swayam Bhagavan Maharaj was saying that devotees of Krishna are like agents of Vamandev. Vamandev came and said, just give me 3 steps of land, that's all I need to lie down. So devotees of Krishna are also like that. Oh, Prabhu, Mataji, you don't have to change your life. Just add Krishna to your life. But they don't say how much Krishna to add. They keep adding, so much so that there's nothing else left. So sometimes joining the Krishna conscious movement is like joining a mafia. It's only a one-way street. You just know, because you know so much, you can't go. This material world is a place of misery, so what are you going to do? So there are only 2 options, either be a happy devotee or be a miserable devotee. But be a devotee regardless. So, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami would say, people that are considered normal in the world today are accepting the worldview and principles of an insane world. So that was live without pretending, and by doing so, we are living a life of honesty. Hear without defending. a lot of times, especially when we're doing some service, and when someone comes to us, "Oh, Prabhu, Mataji, we have some feedback for you." We're like, oh no. Right away in our mind, we're going to think of 10,000 different things to defend ourselves. And then next thing you see, it becomes a table tennis match. Prabhupada said this, boom. Prabhupada said that, boom. We're just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's just, and these days, the glory of internet is such that, it doesn't, previously it would just remain in the room. Now it spills all over to the internet and social media. And we just, each of us is just trying to defend ourselves because of our ego. We all are actually carrying a sense of inflated pride with us. I was listening to this pastime of Her Grace Yamuna, Mother Yamuna. And she was such... Once a devotee told me that a very senior Prabhupada disciple had told him this. And he said that if you really study Srila Prabhupada's travels and, his mission in the West and even in India, his entire span of 12 years, you'll see two devotees who actually have featured in every pioneering yatra that Srila Prabhupada traveled to. And there's two devotees that are actually very prominent that you'll see from 65 to 77. One is His Holiness Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and the second is Grace Yamuna, Mother Yamuna. And once Mother Yamuna, she writes in a biography, I forget her name of a biography, it was published by her god sister, Madina Tarani, Offering of Love. Anyway, I can't remember that exactly, but in that she was such an expert cook and engaged in deity worship, and Prabhupada had personally trained her, that once she was actually making chapatis for Srila Prabhupada, and at that time Srila Prabhupada's servant was His Holiness Sattvarup Maharaj. So Sattvarup Maharaj comes into the room and says, "Prabhupada wants me to teach you to make chapatis." And just imagine, this is Mother Yamuna, who I'm not sure if by that time she had published her book, but she was and even till today, every morning we hear a Govindam prayer, so her state of consciousness, her devotion to Srila Prabhupada, there's no question of it. So, her response was to Maharaj, "Of course, Maharaj, this will be my greatest honor. Please show me how to make chapatis for Srila Prabhupada." That was her humility. So, he showed exactly how Srila Prabhupada wanted to do the chapatis, and then she made them, and then Srila Prabhupada said it was excellent. And later on, she wrote a note that Srila Prabhupada's mode of correction on a lot of occasions, or she said it wasn't just beating with a stick, but it was just through corrections and through ways by which he would try to really drill down that mood of a servant in me. So for us to live this life where we actually hear without defending is that we have to be honest. We shouldn't have Guhyam Akyati Prichati. Have honest conversations with. Once I was attending a retreat, and in that retreat, the facilitator of the retreat said that your Krishna consciousness will be most, you'll never have any difficulty in your Krishna consciousness if you just follow this one principle. And I thought he'll say, just chant without offenses, or just just make sure whatever you do, just please the Vaishnavas. Have at least one person with whom you can actually facilitate, or you can actually practice the 6 loving exchanges. And most importantly, Guhyam Akyati Prichati, where to who you can have an honest conversation about yourself. There should be someone in your life who is proofreading your life. A lot of times, at least for myself, when I examine, there are people in my life, or there are role models, or there are devotees whom I take guidance and inspiration from. And a lot of times, I define the boundaries to which I will let that devotee have access to my life. So I'll, to that devotee or devotees, I will let them in this aspect of my life, but then the other aspects of my life are off limits. No, I'm not allowing you here. Just this. So, if you truly want to know that we are hearing without defending, and most importantly, living a life of humility, is to ask how many such devotees or how many such well-wishers do we have in our life that are willing to proofread our life. And to the extent that we have the blessing of such personalities in our life, to that extent, our Krishna consciousness would be so much more richer and more nourished. Speak without offending. There's always, Vaisheshka Prabhu always says, when we go out in book distribution, we should always make sure that we leave the person that we're trying to distribute to for them to leave with a good experience. And that's dealing with people outside, but also within ourselves. Krishna speaks about in the Bhagavad Gita, where he said, speech that is truthful, pleasing, and beneficial is actually the best. So if we can't speak in that, with that criteria, then we rather not speak. And by speaking without offending, we actually are living a life of sensitivity. Swayam Bhagavan Maharaj was saying that words have that effect that they can just stick in our minds. And he was saying once at the manor they had a guest come. So you know how we have Radha Gopinath on the altar. So on the altar there, right on top of the altar, they had the verse, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam, Kalo nasteva, nasteva, nasteva gatiranyata. So he said this gentleman was observing the altar, devotees were telling him what to do, just general principles of temple etiquette and so. He's like, I understand everything in this temple. I understand, and I've known about your movement for a long time. What I can't understand is on this placard, there is this person named Eva, and she's very nasty. Nasteva, Nasteva, Nasteva. Like, this Eva must be a very nasty person because 3 times her name has been mentioned. So of all the things that were being told to him, this only thing that stuck in his mind was these 3 words. So in our life, or at least in our dealings with each other, how are we interacting? It's sometimes our speech, or sometimes the way we, may say something, we may not intend to do it, but at the same time, it just comes out in that way. So, over the period of time, with our practice of Krishna consciousness, with a sense of introspection, we should really cultivate this mood of speaking without offending, and which actually would be living a life of sensitivity. Lastly, to love without expecting. And by doing so, we are living a life of purity. This is actually a very difficult one. And as we see in the last verse of Shikshashtakam, Ashlishyava padaratam pinashtuma madarshanam marma katam karotu va ita tadava vidatu lampato mat prananate tusa eva naparaha. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and he shall remain so, even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is my worshipful Lord unconditionally. So, a lot of times, at least when we do, like I said, when I speak for myself, when doing service, we're always expecting something. At least for my name to be spelled out, from the microphone, or some sort of acknowledgement or validation. But in the truest sense, love without expecting is the highest goal. And we see that the example of the gopis, example of the Brahmana's wives. And just last week, I believe 2 weeks ago, Ganesham Prabhu, when he was mentioning, he was making reference to Her Grace Krishna Tulsi Mataji, how for 38 years, day in, day out, serving Tulsi Maharani with that love and devotion, totally disregarding or not even caring for her own needs, but just being here to care for Tulsi Maharani. That is love without expecting. Only then, if we understand that one bit, only then we can understand. We can then, because we'll see the number of years, the number of hours, or whatever that she has put in. But the premise is love without expecting. And like I said, it's a difficult one because we expect some sort of, in this material world, there's always, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. There's always this mentality, what you do for me. Relationships, and in all sort of exchanges, there's always this give and take mentality. But when you see personalities who just give and give, then you understand that they are actually truly living this life of love without expecting. So that was the Abhideya. So we spoke about Sambandha, which is where Krishna describes in the 10th chapter, in the Chaturshloki of the Bhagavad Gita, and similarly the Chaturshloki of the Bhagavatam, Canto 2, I believe chapter 9, the 4 verses. And then the Abhideya, because we are practicing sadhaka, so how do we practice, in what mood do we practice bhakti? Later on, we'll be seeing, there'll be further discussion on bhakti in the modes. Lord Kapila will be explained to Madhdevahuti. And then the prayojana, right? What is the prayojana? As Krishna explained to the gopis, may your service itself be your reward. I'm unable to repay the debt, so may the service itself be your reward. So we chant Hare Krishna now, and then we chant Hare Krishna even, there's no end to it. The taste for it and attachment to Krishna grows deeper and deeper and deeper, and that itself is the goal of our practice. So I've gone over time here. I'd just like to end here. These were just some points that, like I said, Maharaj was describing this very beautifully. It's available on YouTube for any of you to have a look. Inner Life of a Devotee. But yeah, that's what I wanted to share. If anyone has maybe one question or comment before we call it quits. Yes, Prabhu. Yep. So this imitation Kapila is described in. I tried to look him up too, and if you read C.C. Adi Leela, chapter 6, verse 14 to 15, there's just a small mention of it where this Kapila is the descendant of Agni. It's coming in the descendant of Agni. That's just two lines that Srila Prabhupada mentions there. I haven't seen much more than that. I just browsed through just a couple of places where could I find about the imitation Kapila, yeah. No, I mean we accept Kapila Dev, the son of Devavati and Kardama's explanation of Sankhya as bona fide. He's an imitation Kapila. So Kali Yuga, we have, once everything gets covered in such ways that we just don't know. Yeah, so Sankhya Yoga basically is counting of these 24 material elements, right? So when we start examining this, right, what is our body made up of? Okay, am I If a body is made up of this, that means I exist outside of this body. And then if I exist outside of this body, what's my basis? If am I a part of this material world or no? If I'm not a part of the material world, then where do I belong in the spiritual world? And in the spiritual world, what is my, what is the basis there, which is having a relationship or um, living in that loving relationship with the Lord. So I believe in the next part, I was reading it and it was described. It is described in this verse, and the next verse. Yeah, actually it's described in verse number 17. If you read the purport, it is described how Sankhya Yoga will actually leads one to devotional service. Yep. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll end here. Thanks again for your attention. Shrimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Hita Go Premanande, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki.